Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. First, thank you to all the viewers who leave comments and who've subscribed to my channel. Really appreciate it. We're growing pretty well and I'm liking that. A special thanks to those people who've been contributing to the Buy Me a Coffee link, which is up in the top right hand corner there. That's really gratifying to know that people are getting enough use out of this to actually give me some money for it. So look forward to in the near future, I'm probably going to make a Patreon where I will have some premium content and different tiers of membership. And I would like some input from my audience on what they would like to see available on those tiers of membership, whether it's um, like live streams or just question answer sessions, or maybe a monthly watch chat, make something live kind of thing, or whatever. I'm open to suggestions, so if you leave some comments in the comment section down below, that'll help me out a great deal. So uh, today I get a lot of questions about bezels and some various issues that come up when you're setting your stone with bezels. And so today I thought I would cover some of the major ones, including depth of bezel and how to deal with some unusually shaped stones. So let's get started on that today. Okay, let's get started. I think we should talk first about some of the setting issues that you have with cabochons of various shapes and sizes and how deep to set them. So I made some high-tech computer graphics here, as you can see right there. And I've drawn out some various common shapes that you find cabochon stones, profile-wise, what they look like and how to deal with individual ones. When you have a bezel, typically your ideal goal is that you want the stone to be sitting up high enough to where it displays the stone really well, but not so high that it's not secure in the bezel. So it's different for different kinds of stones, and you'll see a lot of different kinds of stones with different profiles. So I picked out a few, all about 12 millimeter ones in various shapes, and I made a bezel for them so you can see how they sit in there. But like this dichroic class one here is most like this kind of a shape here when you look at it from the side. So it kind of curves up and around like that, and it's a pretty smooth, even curve all the way around. So that's one type of stone we got. Just your kind of generic-y, uh, kind of a low dome cab with this one here. But the difference on this one, if you notice, is that it's got kind of a vertical side here, and that's pretty consistent all the way around, but then it starts curving sharply up there. Sometimes you get cabs that immediately start curving from the bottom, and I hope you can see this. I'll zoom in on it when I edit this, but you can see it's got kind of a low profile like that. And then you even sometimes find things that are cut into little like flat slabs like a coin, and those are pretty easy to set too. And then after I talk about those, we'll talk a little bit about, and this was the inspiration for it. Somebody asked me about setting bullet-shaped stones, which is kind of a pain in the butt. So we're looking at things like this as well. And even some things like quartz crystals and some stuff with unusually shaped edges. So the thing that really matters with each of these stones, those right there like that, is that you don't want to have too much bezel sticking up. You don't want to have so much sticking up over the curve of the stone that when you bend it in to hold the stone in place, that you're trying to force too much metal into too small of a space. Because when that happens, what you generally get is you get wrinkles and folds and a kind of a sloppy looking bezel, as well as not showing as much of the stone as you might want to. You see this a lot in beginners because they just haven't realized that they need to set them up a little higher, and their stones get kind of buried in the bezel. The good thing is that for all of these things, it's pretty much the same. It's just you're going to have to position them differently in the bezel in order to get the bezel to hit at the right level. So, and Like with this one here, let me make sure I'm still in view here. Okay, so if I have my bezel, I'm probably going to have some backing behind it. Most times you do, not always. But right now you can see I've got it just sticking up just a little tiny bit above where that stone starts to curve. If you have too much, like I said, it's going to fold down and wrinkle. So you want just enough to where you have a tiny grab on that curve of that stone. Okay? Same way with this one here. When you're setting it in your bezel, you want to position the height to be just a little bit above where that curve really starts to go inwards. So you push it down over that space there. This one, you're not going to have much bezel sticking up over the very edge here, just a little bit. And again, you don't want so much that's it's going to wrinkle. So you just need to have a little tiny bit, like maybe a 1/2 millimeter or a 32nd of an inch. It's hard to say that sometimes. Okay, last one here. This is kind of like the same way if you've watched my coin bezel video. Just a little tiny bit above, because you're going to have to actually fold those down to really get a grab on that. But too much, and it's going to try and compress into too small of an area. So it's the same thing with each one. You just have to adjust the level that the stone is sitting in the bezel. Okay, and there's two ways to do that. And the one way is to put some kind of a backing behind it. We'll talk about that in a second. The other way is to file your bezel shorter. Okay? I get the question a lot from people is, why do you have something behind the stone? And that's a really good question. It depends on the situation that you have. Like, use this as an example. This I did an open back bezel on because this is something I made for my wife about 20 years ago. And I made a bezel with a platform on the inside for the stone to sit on because I wanted some light to go through the stone because it's got some translucence to it. And with this one, you can't put anything behind it because it's got an open back. So in that situation, you definitely will have nothing behind it. The problem with having nothing behind it is you're pressing down something against something that's hard, and the metal has a tendency to move back a little bit after you let go of it. And that's pretty standard when you're setting a bezel. It's going to spring back a little bit. So if you have nothing compressible under it, what happens is that when that springs back a little bit, the stone is a little bit wobbly in there. If you have something compressible that you force downwards, when it springs back up, it's going to keep that bezel tight against the stone, and it stays in there a little more snugly. So it gives you some advantages there, as well as allowing you to adjust the height on your bezel. There's other situations that I can think of where you might, with a translucent stone or a transparent stone, I oftentimes will set the stone, with an open back in order to let more light through. Now, there are situations where you may have a setting where you can't do an open back for a transparent or translucent cabochon. And what I usually do in those situations, you don't want to be able to see tagboard or whatever backing you're using through the stone. That's an unattractive look. So what I typically do is I'll use my backing, and then I'll cut a little piece of silver sheet, very thin silver sheet that fits right in there, and I'll set that as the top level underneath the stone. So if this was a translucent stone that was going on here, I'd put several pieces of tagboard in there, and then a piece of silver on top that fits perfectly in there, and then put the stone on top of that. It's still got the compressibility then, but it'll look like silver underneath it. So the bullet-shaped stone situation is one that's difficult to deal with without using some glue. I've not found a good solution for this. I don't remember who asked me this question, but if you stick the bezel, up far enough to get a good grab on it, it's going to be it's going to force the bezel to go in like that. And the thing about these, when they're really tall like this, even if you get it in there nice and snug and everything, and it's not going to come out, they wobble because they're tall like that. So you'll get this kind of a motion in it, and it's almost impossible to get that to stop. So typically when I'm doing this kind of a bezel, I will use a little bit of epoxy in the bezel. Okay? That's just one of those situations. I haven't figured out a better solution to that. If anybody knows of a good solution to that I've not thought of, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear it, because that's been a problem for me in the past as well. Few other things about bezels. Oh, here's another one. This is another, well, the other situations where you might need to use some glue are anytime you have cylindrical or things with just such a small taper that you're not going to be able to get a good grab over it. So this definitely, if you try to do a bezel with no glue, this little kind of tapered piece of black onyx, it's going to really wobble in the setting like that. So you're going to have to use a little bit of glue. Same goes if you're making a bezel for a crystal, like a quartz crystal. After you put it in the bezel here, the crystal has really no taper. It's just straight up and down. So there's no way to secure it in there without some glue. So you're going to have to do that if you're doing this kind of a thing. Okay. A couple of other bezel situations. One of which is a common problem with marquee-shaped stones, and with sometimes with pear-shaped stones like this. And the problem is that they may have kind of a tall top over here as far as where the slope starts, and on the tip here it might be pretty far down, so it's not necessarily the same height where I need to have the top of the bezel down here as where I need it up here. So you may have to do some, well, there's two ways to deal with this. Okay, one, say this is the side of your bezel here. Okay. If you set it at the right height up here, it's not going to be down deep enough back here. So two ways to deal with it. One, you can tip the stone a little bit like that, or no, like that. Let's see, got it backwards in my head. Because you'll have to get this one deep enough, so tilt this front end up just slightly so that it makes it more straight from here to here. That means changing the backing that you have under the front end of it to be a little bit thicker than back here. The way that I typically do it is, rather than that, I just make a gradual taper down in the height of the bezel as it gets towards the tip here, and make sure it's a nice symmetrical slope, and that ends up looking pretty good usually. When you have an unusual kind of edge on your stone, this is a little druzy pyrite, see it kind of, it's low over here, it's high over here, it's low over here, it's got a weird little dip there, so you got all these kind of uneven surfaces to deal with a bezel. And that's doable, you just have to do some creative filing. I try to match the drop wherever it goes down or up, just keep it, you know, consistent around the whole way, and just leave a tiny little bit of bezel above that, enough to just barely fold over that top edge, and that usually works out pretty well. The last situation that gave me fits at first was when you have a stone, and this is the other reason I had this one out. If you have a stone that has pretty sharp corners like squares or rectangles, and they come to a nice sharp point, trying to get those corners over there, I've seen multiple people with different methods for dealing with that. Some are good, some are bad. Some, and even some of the high-end jewelry catalogs I've seen, were done very sloppily, and it's not really that hard to make them look pretty neat. What I usually do is on the corner, right at the top of the bezel here, not down here, but more up here, I filed it just about half as thick as the rest of the bezel. So if you're using 28 gauge bezel like I do, it's not very much, it's just a little bit. You're reducing the amount of silver that's in that space there. You do that on all four corners, Then it's easier to compress that because there's not as much metal you're compressing into the area. It squishes down over the corners much more neatly, and then you can go back around and burnish it and make it look pretty good. So, okay, the last thing that I was going to talk about is I get a lot of people asking me why I use tagboard as a backing. And by tagboard, what I mean is I usually steal the backs off of legal pads, and this is if there's somebody at your office that you don't like, wait until after it's closing time, get in their desk, cut off all the backs, all their legal pads, and just act like nothing's ever happened. You'll have plenty of backing material for your bezels for a long time. But the reason I like that stuff is it holds together over time. It's got some glue in it. Somebody made a comment not too long ago about using sawdust and why they like sawdust. And the reason that they said they like sawdust was that it didn't break down over time. And that's honestly just the opposite of what I have found. And I didn't know how to say that without sounding snarky. But sawdust is little tiny wood particles, and they have a lot of surface area. So as moisture gets under there, it has more ways to attack it more quickly. And so it tends to rot pretty quickly. Now, the reason I know this is I've taken stones out of some really old jewelry from a long time ago, and they used sawdust, and most of the sawdust was pretty much gone. And it looked to me like what they'd done is, as the stone had gotten loose over time, they'd taken it somewhere and asked the jeweler to fix it, and what they did was just push it down further and tighten the bezel up around it. So eventually it's pretty much buried in the bezel. I took apart a couple of pieces that had kind of a tag board like I use that were at least 30 or 40 years old. And I saw virtually no deterioration whatsoever in those. And so I haven't done a scientific test of this, so I don't know for sure. But and if you ask different people, they'll probably give you different answers. But I found that the tag board holds up longer over time. So take that with a grain of salt. You definitely, though, want something that is compressible. Somebody I knew said they used old credit cards that they chopped up, which is plastic, and plastic doesn't compress much, so it might raise something to the correct level that you want it to be, but it's not going to compress much, so I wouldn't use that. Something compressible is good. All right, that's mostly what I want to talk about today. Another time I will talk about some various prong setting things, but for now let's go with this. All right, well, I hope you found that one to be useful. I know it isn't a glamorous topic, but it's one of those things that might be useful for beginners especially. If you found it to be useful and enjoyable, make sure to hit the like button down below, and I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe to my channel. I think it has a lot of valuable content. And don't forget, there's a link if you feel like contributing to me up at the top right-hand corner of the main channel page. There's also links in the descriptions of the videos, as well as links to my website if you wanted to peruse some of my jewelry. So again, thank you for all the people commenting and saying such nice things. I really appreciate that. And I hope you have a really nice holiday this holiday season. So thanks again. Happy silversmithing. Take care.